Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Aadi. I'm here joined today by Major General Harsha Kakar, who's going to talk to us about the ongoing India and China standoff in the Ladakh sector and then, of course, in Sikkim as well. The Major General is an alumni of the National Defense Academy, who joined the Indian Army in 1979, has been a part and spearheaded many roles in the Indian Army, and currently is a renowned voice in strategic affairs relating to India's military and defense sector. Thank you, sir, for joining me, sir.
My pleasure.
And, giving me an opportunity to, chew your ear for a little bit and gain some knowledge. So, my first question, it's going to be a little general, where I just want to know what do you think are the motives of the Chinese by starting to put pressure on India today? Of course, there's been many small standoffs that have happened before, but why something like this suddenly?
Realistically speaking, no one really has an answer.
Sir.
Even the External Affairs Minister made the same comment that we have yet to know as to why the Chinese came in. Among the views that are being projected is starting off with abrogation of Article 370, splitting the state into two union territories, the construction of the road which goes up to Daulat Beg Oldie, the threat that would come up with that road having come up towards the CPEC and the Karakoram Pass, India-US proximity, and in case China is to actually dominate Asia, it has to bring India down. So these are multiple reasons that have been projected. The Chinese side keeps switching from one reason to the other. There's also the reason that possibly India not having joined the Belt Road Initiative, it's turning out to be a loss, especially as far as the CPEC is concerned, and China is worried that there's no money going to come back. As also the fact that India has not joined the RCEP, which again makes China lose a major market within India. So multiple reasons are being floated. The actual reasons are not really known. But definitely, there is no doubt that the intention is to ensure that India doesn't get too close to the US, which backfired. India doesn't join the Quad, and the Quad, which is presently just an alliance, doesn't become, which is just a grouping at the moment, doesn't become an alliance.
Alliance, okay.
So these are the aspects which appear more logical, and the fact that in South Asia, if you have to dominate South Asia, India has to be brought down. And that is something the Chinese were looking at doing. But they were not able to make much headway on account of the Indian influence. So these are, in my opinion, possibly the major reasons why this came. And after all, if you're looking at it as a threat to Karakoram, I think it's illogical answer, because any of the bridges on the road, whether it's on the road to Daulat Beg Oldie or on the Karakoram Pass, need just a missile. You don't need to go and put troops there. Or even a standoff using the aircraft are good enough to knock them off in case of operations or in case of a threat. So to use that as a major excuse, I don't think is really logical.
So you mean to say there's a larger picture at play?
It has to be. After all, for Z to initiate such an action, it has to be a far larger picture. It cannot be a small sort of a story. Of course, there's another talk, which in my opinion again fits into the bill, is the centenary year of the CCP.
Correct, yes.
Which will fall in on 1st of October. So at that time, in case Xi Jinping could have stated that, look, I've fulfilled our claims in Ladakh, and also fulfilled getting back Taiwan in the fold, because you suddenly find the China-Taiwan region hotting up. So these could get added to it, but there has to be a much larger picture. It's not just that small road that India has made to Daulat Beg Oldie.
You're referring to the 5 fingers of Tibet, if I'm...
The 5 fingers which China talks about, which includes Ladakh, Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal. So these are the areas that it looks at, and Arunachal. But it wouldn't have looked at all the 5, it would have looked at possibly one odd finger coming up now, the rest later, but this would have, raised his stature to that of among the highest of all Chinese rulers, and after all placed him in history books.
Mm.
For anyone who has now come to the power and he is the supreme ruler of a country, or more like a king, equivalent to Hitler, who had all the powers. See, now you're looking at something beyond. You're looking at making a name in history. You're looking at, being the ultimate who's ever ruled China. So if you have to be that, then you have to do something which no one else has done. Reunify Taiwan, take over your areas which you've claimed. So those are the things that would possibly be more of his interest than these small issues of roads or a small threat to Karakoram, because he knows India has no offensive designs in China.
Hmm. So, but one thing that really amazes me about this entire thing, I mean, they were doing an exercise in Tibet that is pretty well known to everybody. Why Ladakh of all the regions? Because there are multiple other regions that they could have chosen. Point one. There are, for example, in the Arunachal, they pretty much know the area. If you look at the history of the 62 war, it's a little better in terms of the environment, in terms of the the temperature and everything. Why in turn Ladakh, where even their soldiers are kind of suffering quite badly?
They were not expecting that, number one. They were expecting that they would, reach their claim lines without any Indian hindrance. That is what they were first expecting. They didn't expect the sort of retaliation that took place. They didn't expect Galwan. And by declaring them, by awarding them with wartime gallantry awards, you've actually conveyed a message that we've taken the Chinese action as an act of war, not as a normal incursion. So that's a strong message that India has sent on Republic Day. But the fact is that, they thought that they would go through. That's why they came all prepared with those handheld barbaric weapons, which no army ever carries.
Of course.
So what shocked them was the Indian retaliation. What further hit them was the Indian counterstroke of taking those heights on the southern bank, which overlooked their bases, and thereby now they are more vulnerable than we are.
Mhm.
Because anything that you try, and if you have to hit back, it is Choldo, which is their base, which is the first one to go. So they now have to be more alert, and if they have to bypass that area, they've got to make new road, which is not going to be an easy task.
He does.
So therefore, the situation that has come is they were not expecting the way we would react. Normally, including in Doklam, we prefer talks. We've
Mm.
not acted. We've just blocked them, and we prefer talks. So they were hoping that by the time we would react and block, they would have reached where they wanted to. But that didn't happen. And when it didn't happen, now they're in a stalemate, because if you remain where you are, it's a stalemate. It's a gain for India,
Correct.
because where they've come in about 7-8 kilometers and where we've gone, they claim is about 4.5 kilometers into their territory. So actually, you've actually gained nothing.
Nothing.
The
Yes.
standoff, the standoff in the other region, which is basically in the Demchok Plains, is nothing new. But that's just a standoff, and that is not something which is of concern, because you haven't actually done anything else but just blocked a few patrols. And
Mm.
these patrol points are our own designation. So that is not a major issue at all. But the fact is that now that you've been prevented from moving forward, now if you have to move back, then again it will be a second one after Doklam, which is unwilling, which is unacceptable to them at this stage. So what's on now is to try and get some face-saving gestures between some face-saving answers, which gives them a sort of a reason if they have to pull back and justifies whatever they've done.
So, looking at the recent action in Sikkim, is that just a one-off case, or were they kind of poking or trying out their luck to see whether they could open another front on this side?
See, the way the army chief had said immediately after Doklam, he says the Chinese salami slicing will continue and we need to be prepared. So these are going to be certain probes here and there which you're going to get. You're going to get them in Arunachal, you're going to get them in Sikkim, you're going to get them in areas where things have been peaceful. Even you might even find something coming up in Uttarakhand.
Uttarakhand, yes.
So these are things that will continue. These are actions by the Chinese hoping to push through, but every time they get pushed back. And the moment they get pushed back, then they deny anything happened, because they don't want to announce across the world that we attempted something and we didn't succeed.
Mm.
So that is something which will happen. And
Mm.
the reality is that it did happen. It wouldn't have been a very major incident. It would have been something small. But the fact is that they did try something.
Of course, yes, sir. one of the things that comes to all of our minds, of course, as we just mentioned, that the Chinese are facing a tough time in the temperature and everything like that. When the snow melts, do you find it the situation also heating up, or the Chinese trying to probe a little harder? Because they did block a river in the Galwan area. They did try a lot of other things, which are, of course, a lot of it is speculation, a lot of it is unconfirmed. I don't want to dwell into that. My main question is, would they be having a an enhanced push towards their effort?
See, the winters have been a stall for them. They've had far more casualties. We've been able to monitor ours, and we've been able to keep a lot under check on account of the fact that our troops are used to it.
Hmm.
Historically, Chinese have never stayed in Tibet or in this region of Ladakh uh, ever since '62 in winters.
Hmm.
They all back in end October or so, and then beyond that, it is the border guards and the militia, which are basically locals who are hardened and aware and used to the regional state. It's the first time that the PLA has stayed. Now, as the snow melts and the summers come in, both sides are expecting something from the other. The Chinese are expecting an Indian push, we're expecting a Chinese push. Now, whether they would want to risk escalation is where the question comes. After all, when you escalate in one area, you can't just keep it contained into that area. Now, how much do you escalate? After all, both are nuclear powers. Are you only going to escalate in localized action?
Hmm.
How does India respond? So it is something which everyone speculates that China may attempt something. It could be one. It is very difficult to judge their intentions because
Hmm.
that's something which is really difficult to know and possibly not easy to determine. It could be continuing, it could be small attempts here and there, but I don't expect them to try and escalate it further because the focus now tends to be shifting towards Taiwan. That is where the focus tends towards shifting. And that is what the reason why the number of exercises, the number of sort of breaches of the airspace and
Yes.
things are on the rise.
Hmm.
So tough to say whether he's going to switch back to Ladakh or he's going to continue his looks at Taiwan. Difficult to say because even Senkaku Islands is now facing pressure. So that's when the US Secretary of Defense had to make a comment that we are committed to ensuring that Senkaku Islands remains with Japan as part of the US Japan treaty. So the pressures are building up that side. Will he again switch here? Will he try and activate both sides? I really don't know. I mean, it's tough to determine, but I don't expect very much push to come here. In his opinion, he claims to have stalled India, but what he's actually done is opened our eyes and made us switch effort from the Western Front to the Northern Front, something which a large number of us have been saying from time immemorial.
Long time, yes, sir. Well, sir, if you, I mean, as a layman, when I look at a map of the area of Aksai Hill, if I may put it that way, just to put a message across, the lines of communication for the Chinese aren't that easy. I mean, they don't have an airfield in that area. They don't. They've got one base which is close to the Aksai Chin Lake. Um, the roads, of course, are there, but I mean, we always get scared with the fact that they've got such good roads and everything like that. As a military person who's been, associated with this game, do you think that they're actually in a very strong place in terms of their lines of communication from back home?
See, the problem is not your roads alone. The problem is where are your administrative bases? Where do you get your stores from? The problem starts there.
Hmm.
If you've got to get your stores from mainland China, which is what they had to do when they had to build these shelters,
Yes,
now you look at the distance that you need to carry the stuff. You may have communication, but it's going to take that much of time.
time.
Now, if you've got to build up, earlier we used to look at the Chinese taking possibly one season to build up, and the next season is when they would launch.
Hmm.
But currently, with the sort of road structures that they've created, they've been able to do a lot of build up and but then ultimately, when you do the build up and you move, you've got to move your stocks of artillery, weapon pieces. You've got to move your missile elements. You've got to move the air force, the aircraft can fly in, but then the rest of the support lot has got to be moved forward. Whether it's fuel, whether it's the ammunition or the munitions that the air force is going to use. Now,
Hmm.
all that has got to be moved forward, stocked, dumped, and kept. In our case, we've got all our stocks and everything kept in the Ladakh region, because for us, we didn't have an option on account of the cutting off of the roads. So we are used to it, and for us, it's always been a sort of a concept, and we've been doing that. Now, for them, yes, you have better roads, so your movement is faster, your reaction time is faster. Now, the difference that comes in the roads earlier, which is what they were feeling hurt about when we made our roads, was that their convoy or their patrols would come by vehicle, whereas ours would move by foot.
Foot.
So, with the bargain that they were always at an advantage when it came down to a standoff. Now, that advantage is being offset, and which is what they're getting hurt, because our roads are coming up all along Arunachal, Sikkim, this area in Ladakh, Uttarakhand. So that is changing the sort of nature of conflict or the nature of standoffs. And
Mm.
as I've written earlier, that standoffs is now going to be a regular feature.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
earlier they would come faster and we would react. Now we are able to move equally fast. So we are monitoring, and the moment you get the inputs, you're able to move equally fast.
You mentioned a face-saving event, sir. I mean, neither one of the forces would want to go back to their country and say, okay, we lost the game. Because with India, I mean, considering the history of 1962, it's not going to be acceptable at all. And I don't think we should even talk about that. What my question is, I am looking at what is the Chinese face saver going to be? Because it's more of a propaganda game with them. So what kind of a game, what kind of you know, a narrative then that they can create wherein they can save their face and go back to their people? Because sorry, but we all know they got a big hit during Doklam.
They got a hit during Doklam, they got a hit during Galwan. The question is, how do you come down to a sort of agreement? Possibly they would look at something diplomatic coming through on commitments made by India. You see, you've got to realize, to understand the concept of face saving, you've got to understand the current concept of talks. Now, the military level talks that are currently on are not a means of taking a decision. The commanders on the ground are not the decision makers.
Correct.
Commanders on the ground are the means of conveying a nation's message to the other. Whatever is conveyed by China is discussed by the China Study Group in Delhi, and similarly, what India conveys is discussed in Beijing. Now, the decisions that the two groups take is conveyed from one nation to the other by means of hotlines. So, what they're actually working at is a means of slowly reducing the gap that exists on the two sides. And once you've been able to reduce the gap to a reasonable level, and you feel that you've got a solution in mind, when will be possibly when either the two external affairs ministers or the two national level leaders, somewhere or the other, will meet at a political level to then come down to an agreement. So where will this gap end? From the Chinese side and from our side. See, we are sticking on to one line of status quo. Now, they are looking at it differently. So the question is, it's not whether one will bend or the other will bend. To resolve it, would you come down to a political announcement which will involve some give and take here and there? I don't know, but today there's another vague feeling coming in my mind, is the announcement by Bajwa on talks with India for resolution. Is this pushed by China? Because if you come down to talks, you secure the Karakoram highway currently. Okay, you don't come down to any war scenario. If that becomes the first stage, would the Chinese follow suit?
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's just a thought. It's a very, very wild thought, because there is no way Pakistan would make an announcement, that also the army chief, without approval from China. After all, he is fully equipped, supported, and in every way backed by China. So for him to have made this announcement without clearance from China, in my mind, is rather doubtful.
That is pretty interesting, sir. And as a matter of fact, a couple of months ago, when the Chinese did some exercises with the Pakistanis, and the Pakistani media started talking about the Skadu airfield and this airfield and that airfield, being used by the Chinese actively. It brought a question to mind that is this at the behest of China? Most of us know the answer. It is yes. My question is, does Pakistan actually have a choice in this entire matter? Or they are just going to be mute spectators or a pawn in the whole game?
See, China is unlikely to involve Pak in any such action with India because that will lower their prestige and standing.
Correct.
And Pak is also unwilling to get into a conflict with India. One of the major reasons is that with the economy in the current state, no backing from the Arab states which they had got in 65, in 71 and in 99 until
99.
about a few years ago, they would in this financial state literally have no reserves of oil and ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
You need funds for that. And
Correct.
unless you have reserves of oil and ammunition, your armed forces are incapable of operating. The Indian Navy has the power to blockade off Karachi. And the moment it blockades off Karachi and destroys the oil dumps in Karachi or even attempts to do so, you have to literally survive on your oil reserves. Have you got oil reserves to fight a full-fledged war? If you don't have oil reserves to fight a full-fledged war, you're going to hesitate in what you're going to do. So the possibility of Pak getting involved is doubtful. And if China decides to use Pak airfields, China is going to lower its own global prestige of its PLA. So that also, in my opinion, doesn't appear to be a sound logic. But yes, what appears logical is why did Bajwa make that comment? And was it at China's behest? Is it an, a link to what China and India have been talking about? Don't know.
Or is it just a diversion?
Diversion unlikely because at that level you don't make a comment which then gets literally supported by the foreign office and by the government of Pak.
Mm-hmm.
So these are not things that are made lightly. These are things that are made with deliberate thought.
So one big question is that we all know China's Achilles heel lies in the seas. It's not in the land. They've got. I mean, a lot of people say that PLA's soldiers are soft and stuff, but they're still soldiers. They know how to fight their guns. They know how to use their guns. They know how to use their missiles. They've got good equipment. Is it that the Chinese are using the PLA to kind of divert our attention from the seas?
That is one of the perceptions because when you find the budget coming out or the perception coming out that the land borders are important. At the same time, go back to about 3 years ago when the last army chief the last naval chief was addressing the press conference prior to the Navy Day. And when someone asked him about the Chinese and the Indian Ocean, he made a comment. He says, to operate your naval fleet 3,000 kilometers away from your base versus a naval fleet which is operating from its own base, home base, there's a world of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Chinese to be able to move a major fleet into the region without major bases, something like the US has got in Guam or, it's not something which you can just move. If you have a base where your ship longs for a few days, it's not a naval base where you have stocks of ammunition and replenishments in the works.
Mm-hmm.
If that has to come from 3,000 kilometers, then your Navy's range is automatically restricted. The US has got a base in Philippines, it's got a base in Japan. All of these are well stocked with everything. So that's a world of a difference as compared to how the Chinese would operate.
So that basically, I mean, it may not be so, but they are trying to kind of keep us away from the ocean so that they can move freely around in that place.
Yes. No, they yet got to come well within the area to be able to move around freely and to dominate the region.
Mm-hmm.
They still got to do that, which is one of the reasons that the moment the US fleets move into the South China Sea,
Mm-hmm.
and that the Chinese Navy is also bottled into the same region.
It's a game of chess, actually.
Correct.
So, what do you think China's response is going to be to the Quad? I mean, it possibly no logical person would want to stand up against four countries, no less the factor that United States, which is the biggest military power in the world, leaving them aside, any other four countries, nobody would want to do that. Here is a country who's ready to push it back.
As far as the Quad is concerned, presently it's a grouping. It hasn't turned into an alliance like the NATO or something.
Mm-hmm.
See, unless it becomes an alliance, The Chinese, of course, know that in case something does happen, India will jump to make it into an alliance which the US is desperate for, but India is not for it. And India has openly announced that it will not form part of any of what the US calls the FNOPs in the South China Sea, the Freedom of Navigation
Yes.
operations. Right? And now, as India said that it will operate under a US commander, unless it's under a UN flag. So the question is that at the moment it's a grouping,
Mm.
but the grouping is getting stronger. The grouping is moving way beyond just military aspects, diplomatic, economic, and into multiple others. India, Japan, and Australia had already signed an agreement which will start getting implemented from this year. That is of shifting its support, its basically economic supply chain away from China. So
Mm.
the three countries are working together towards doing that. So it's moving into multiple dimensions. US is keen it becomes an alliance because that would give them the strength and give them the backing in case of anything happening in the region between them and China. So the Chinese are scared that it shouldn't move into that aspect,
Okay.
which is one of the reasons why they're trying to put a block.
Mm.
And they're hoping that the RCEP, which also includes Japan and Australia, will be possibly one of the factors which may prevent the Japanese or the Australians from joining in. But let's see how it goes because as of now, it is still a grouping, and a grouping itself is enough. But you've got to remember that at the moment, it's not only the Quad, the French, the British, and the Netherlands,
Mm.
as also Germany, have also decided to move their vessels into the Indo Pacific, mainly because of the threat posed by China. So you're going to get a multitude of navies operating in the region, generally all together versus the Chinese.
Is it? I mean, as far as strategic goals of the Chinese are concerned today, with of course the new administration coming in, they had a huge hope that they would be able to pursue Joe Biden into, having a more softer approach towards China. Do you think that the strategic goals for the Chinese are going to change because their narrative in the past 2 weeks has been aggressive, both the sides? So, is there some change in the place, or it's just going to go on towards this whole thing when they're going to get isolated from each other?
See, as far as the US is concerned, any country, in fact, in the US mainly, their national interests come priority, no matter who is in the chair.
Hmm.
You cannot switch your national interests away because you want to enhance maybe economic or other interests. Now, as far as the US China are concerned, there will be a conflict in terms of military power. There'll be a conflict in terms of economic power. There'll be a conflict in terms of technological power, including artificial intelligence, robotics, the works,
Mm-hmm.
which is what the Chinese are trying to gain from the US. There will be collaboration in terms of climate change. There will be collaboration in terms of nuclear non-proliferation. So therefore, in some form, there will be a dialogue between the two in some aspects, and there will be competition between the two in the others.
Mm-hmm.
The intention of the dialogue is to ensure that relationships don't go off gear or an incident blows into a conflict. The aim is to prevent that.
Mm-hmm.
So you will continue engagement like India and China are still doing. But at the same time, you will continue your competition. You will continue trying to prevent them from achieving their hostile intentions in the South China Sea,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's Taiwan, whether it's Japan. They know India is capable of handling it on its own. Whatever India will need in terms of support, in terms of equipment, that will come readily. So that will continue. So that is the sort of support that we will need. We will not need on-ground support in any form. But this sort of competition and expecting Biden to change or show a bit of laxity towards China is unlikely because the US national interests cannot change.
Mm-hmm.
They will remain supreme.
So, as far as the tactics in the Indian response is concerned, I'm not just I'm talking about the overall picture here, wherein we are talking to them. We've done these app bans, and of course, they have a huge economic impact, and they have a huge cyber sort of an impact, wherein we are actually pushing across a narrative of our own back to the Chinese, who are supposed to be the masters of narrative. What do you think are some things that we can do that can actually push back this narrative of the Chinese that the Indians are being aggressive in this entire thing? That's one. And second, do you think that the government is actually being a little more passive in terms of diplomacy, overheated diplomacy by putting in Tibet, Taiwan, or any other region in the picture? Is it being done for a particular reason? Do you see a strategic goal, or is it that they just want to not really, push the button right now?
See, as of now, what the government is doing is maintaining both. You put a block on them and you're keeping talks as the option. We're looking for a solution without it getting hotter than what it already is.
Mm.
After all, neither nation wants it to get hot, and neither nation wants an incident which will blow into a conflict. Because basically, we both have our own economies to consider. We both have our own interests to consider. So, with that sort of a scenario, we're keeping both open. Now, the same thing gets linked when you look at the other red lines of China. The Chinese red lines are Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan. On these, India is still maintaining its silence, though, of course, it is easy for India to break it. Tibet is in our hands. The moment you give the Dalai Lama a loose rope and you give the Tibetan government in exile a loose rope, a lot can happen. But again, all that can lead to an escalation which we are trying to avoid.
Right.
The aim is you're looking at a solution without an escalation. But if the push comes to shove and if it has to go there, then that is the ultimate card that the government of India has. And that card will not come into play unless it is absolutely essential. So as of now, you're keeping the cards with you. A lot of men like me have been writing that you need to now start opening the cards slowly. But I think the government is still being cautious in opening the cards because there's no point in immediately spoiling the environment and pushing it to a point of no return. Things are at the moment contained well. You are in a position of strength. In every meeting, the first thing the Chinese say is pull back from south of Pangongso, which we turned down. So basically, you are now in a position. Now it's for them to look at a solution. And you're not pushing the red lines so fast because you don't want it to escalate immediately. If yes, the Chinese do not listen and they attempt something further, then possibly you may start releasing your red lines.
So it's something that you're holding back right now. It's not off the table completely.
Holding it back. No.
So one of the biggest things that actually surprised me about India keeping, military missions in India are so hard to read about. You really don't know what has happened. I mean, especially a person like me who likes to know and do stuff about it. The unheard stories of the Indian soldier is something that is not known to people. Only within the hearts and minds of the soldiers that have actually been there. And only certain few actually talk about it. The release of information about the Special Frontier Force, it seemed to be very good. Of course, I appreciate that. But it seemed to be a move in a particular direction, or it seemed to be a hint. How do you interpret it?
There are multiple reasons why they were used. Firstly, they are the acclimatized troops. They live there. They know the region. They are acclimatized to the weather conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you move into something absolutely new, where you don't even have the basic defenses, unless you're well acclimatized, it's difficult to survive. That's number one. So these were the best chosen lot. Second, of course, would have been to convey a message. See, these decisions taken at the top level are always intended with a message. And it would have been to convey a message, and I think that message has gone through. So these are the means that are used. But again, you've got to note that everything doesn't come out in the public domain. The SFF is a different force by itself. That's the reason it's kept apart. That's the reason it's kept where it is. And you don't find them roaming around in cities of Delhi or other places. They're not meant to be there.
Of course.
So that is it. And some level, some inputs are best kept the way they are because those who need to know, and especially the adversary who needs to know, is well aware. So that the intention is to give it to him, and he is well aware, and he knows exactly what is happening, and he knows the power that these guys have got on the local population.
Is it that the use of these forces is also to create a little bit of a fervor in the local population? Just to have, of course, they are. I mean, I have been there to that area. They are more Indian than anybody else. Bharat Mata ki Jai is something which is a common dialogue, which is over there. A lot of people are shy in the rest part of the country, but in Ladakh, Arunachal, people are very proud of that fact. So,
There is no doubt about it, but I don't think it was intended for the locals because they're well aware. And in fact, for them to be involved in operations which they were kept away from was to also give them a chance to be a part of the regular action which goes on.
mm,
So I think it was not intended to try and sort of impress the locals that you're doing something. It was possibly using the best force in the best place at the best time.
very interesting, sir. Finally, sir, there is, of course, past 2 days have been very eventful with regards to the international hand in whatever is happening in India and the national capital, although it doesn't really um, impact the military defense of this country, but it is also that, it is a big question on the internal defense of this country. And psychologically speaking, the Chinese are pretty good at this. Although there is a lot of proof coming in the TV about Pakistan, Canada, UK, and a whole lot of other things. One name which is missing from this entire list is China. They've got the money to do stuff like this. UK doesn't. Canadians, I mean, they are very self-centered. They want to have this press coverage, but they don't really want to open their wallets. Pakistanis are, I mean, dry. It's just a fleeting thought, and I thought I'll just bring it up to you and see what you have to say. Whether they're firing on somebody else's shoulder by putting in the money.
If you look at the map of Khalistan, you'll find that the map runs along the Indo-Pak border. It
Those
doesn't
guys.
include Kartarpur. It doesn't include Kartarpur Sahib, which they swear by. It doesn't include Lahore, which is the seat of Ranjit Singh. Okay, one. Number two is those who are sitting in Canada only give speeches there.
Yes.
They're unwilling to come there and get involved.
No way, sir.
Okay, so for them, the role is to give speeches and try and possibly, hook in the people who are local here to do something, but not get involved themselves. As far as the funding is concerned, to a large extent, it is Pak. Now, who is giving it to Pak to fund? I wouldn't commit because, I wouldn't confirm it because it's nothing in black and white. But definitely, there is a logic of China being involved because anything to do with India, China has to have a hand at the back.
I mean,
Whether it's being done quietly, whether it's being done in whichever way, there is nothing which has come out in black and white. None of these guys have visited China. But it's never difficult for China to fund it through one of its embassies, through one of its networks. So after all, money goes wireless. Money goes from anywhere to anywhere today.
yeah,
So who knows from where it's going to where? After all, for anyone to try and push through all of this, you need funds.
exactly,
Now
sir.
someone has to be funding it. And it's not the armed man who's going to be funding it. It has to come in mass quantity from somewhere. Who's doing it? Unless the government really comes out with something, it's difficult to comment, and it's not correct to point a finger at anyone. But yes, there is an option of them being involved, either using the Pak shoulder or using their own networks. They funded the Taliban. Now, as far as the Taliban is concerned, they visited China on more than one occasion.
Yes.
So you know that the Chinese is involved somewhere.
One of the reasons
In
this
case,
thought was
so in this case, there has been no visits as such. There has been no interaction as such. But you don't need them. You don't need physical interactions in such cases. And in the current environment, if the moment the word gets out that China is involved, uh, the whole movement will suffer a major setback. So that is not getting out officially. But whether it's being done unofficially, my guess is as good as yours.
because it's for me the main thing was that brought this thought was the involvement of the Taliban and something that these guys had done, which is actually nobody discusses about it in the media today. It's the Chinese have been able to cover it up very, very nicely. few people who actually read would know about it.
See, no, if you look at it this way, the US recently released a statement, I think it was yesterday or day before, where they said that Pakistan is acting on China's behest as far as the Taliban is concerned because the aim is to secure Afghanistan for exploitation by both Pak and China.
Yeah.
Right, China, the first thing China wants to do is push the Belt and Road into Afghanistan and from Afghanistan into Central Asia again, hoping that the CPEC starts getting in some revenue. So it's evident that any policy that Pak takes, after all, with the way Pak owes China, that there is no way it can take any decision or make any announcement without the concurrence of the Chinese. And I think for Pak, the Chinese ambassador in Islamabad is possibly the go-between of the authority before they make a statement. Which is why when I said about Bajwa making such a national statement, it cannot be without the Chinese back. So there has to be a Chinese hand somewhere, but unless it's proved, one cannot officially say that there is a Chinese support. I think it will be unfair to the movement, to those who are genuinely protesting, and to the others by throwing the blame on China because nothing is yet confirmed.
So, last question, of course, relating to Pakistan. Pakistan seems to be enjoying this entire thing, rather, sitting quiet in one corner and gloating its success with regards to COVID and so many other things. They think they've got lower number of cases. Well, congratulations to them. But the main thing is it's a simple playbook that you can see opening out again. In the 70s, Bhutto had said that we will create another Bangladesh next to Pakistan. They tried that, they failed. They tried Kashmir, they failed. Is it that they're just reverting to this whole thing again in terms of Punjab? And of course, the money part I've already asked you.
That's evident. That is evident that they're trying to do so, but the fact remains that there are very few supporters for it in India, hardly any. And nobody wants to go back to those days because the sort of development that has taken place, the sort of economy that is there, nobody wants it to get back to that level. And their attempt is when you fail in one, you try elsewhere. When you fail there, go back. So that is something that they're looking at. Not that they're going to succeed, but it's always a dream. In fact, if you read into somewhere into Pak editorials in their own newspapers, you will find that they also know that Khalistan is a dream which will never come true. But the only intention is to keep pricking, keep doing pinpricks on India, hoping something or the other. So that is the way their game goes.
Well, sir, thank you so much for this time. I'm really honored that you've joined me today and given me, a whole lot of actually a very different perspective to this whole situation, because the actuality of the situation is not really discussed by anyone. Everybody talks about and they want to be satellite maps and this and that, but nobody talks about the larger picture, and that is something that I wanted to actually understand from you. And I hope I'm going to make this video about it, and I hope the people are appreciative of the points and the knowledge that you've given us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I'll be again requesting you sometime in the near future whenever there is something that I would like to ask you.
Sure, no, not a problem.
Thank you, sir. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
You too. Take care. Bye bye.